What's up YouTube, it's LEGO King 71 and I'm super excited for today's video because it's the first video in my brand new Raven Knight Castle MOC building series. In today's video, I'll be showing my process for designing the layout of the new MOC, then I'll be building all the terrain and water, and finally you'll get to see how the main gate and outer walls were built. For a while now, I've wanted to do something for this castle that I haven't seen done very often. Build a medieval castle located in a swamp. If you're familiar with my channel, you'll know that this is the third castle MOC I've created, and I honestly think it might be my favorite of them all. With that being said though, I still highly recommend checking out my previous Black Falcon Castle and Dragon Knight Castle videos if you haven't seen those MOCs yet. After finishing my Black Falcon Castle MOC, I wasted no time getting started on coming up with the design for my new castle and sketching it out on a piece of paper. The first thing I sketched out were the shapes for a series of islands that will be separated by canals that intersect throughout the MOC. These curved shapes will look great and make the islands very natural looking. In the middle are the two largest islands, with some additional smaller islands surrounding them. The large island to the left will have a path leading to the Raven Knight's castle, which will be on the island directly to the right. On the left island, there will also be quicksand, some castle ruins, and a wood cabin. The right island will be where I build the Raven Knight's castle, but as you'll soon see, the castle I'm building them is more of a wooden fort and stone castle hybrid. Because driving long wooden poles into the ground is a commonly used technique to build in marshy swampland, I thought it made a lot of sense to build the Raven Knight's fort using long wooden poles shaved into sharp spikes at the top. Before I fully committed to this idea, I decided to make a prototype wall and tweak the design until I had something I liked. Here's what I came up with. The towers and main gate would still be built out of stone, and I also wanted to build a large stone cathedral in this MOC. On the right side of this island will be a dock and a wooden building attached that would serve as a port for the Raven Knights. To the right of this, I'll build a large water area so that larger ships will have access to the port as well. This led me to the idea of building a lighthouse for the port on a small cliff area towards the back right corner of the MOC. Left of that will be an area for a blacksmith and another wooden building with a water wheel and a watchtower. Towards the front of the MOC, I'll add another watchtower and a small camp for the Raven Knights stationed on that island. There's also a medium-sized island on the back left corner of the MOC. Here, I'll build some more castle ruins and place an orc camp. To the left of the orc camp will be a ranger outpost that is built on stilts with a dock attached to the front. Now that I had a sketch and plan to work off of, it was time to start laying out the base plates and start building. You'll notice there's a 6 stud wide gap between the base plates in the middle because LEGO doesn't make any base plates that would fit into these dimensions. This won't be a problem though, because this gap and the brightly colored base plates will all be covered by the terrain and water I build on top later in this video. The total size of this MOC is 152 studs by 86 studs, but I wasn't sure how big the island should be in order to fit everything that I had planned in my sketch. So to figure this out, I decided to start by building the main gate, the walls, and the side towers first. Then, based on that, I'd be able to figure out the dimensions everything else needed to be. You'll notice in this time lapse that I built the main gate completely separate from the base plate so that later I could place it onto the MOC at any angle I'd like. Like I mentioned earlier, the main gate and side towers will be made out of stone. And to make the main gate stand out from the side towers, I decided to build these awesome looking hexagonal shaped towers on either side of the gate. Since the walls of the towers can't connect to the studs on the bottom, the way that they're held together is pretty clever, I think. Each of the walls has a Technic axle protruding horizontally from it. On the end of that axle, there's a Technic connector piece that allows each wall piece to slide onto another Technic axle that is placed vertically at the center of the tower. Each of these walls of the tower are then lined with 1x2 cheese slopes that perfectly fill the angled gaps between each of the walls where they meet. Above the archway, I added a cross-shaped arrow slit to make the wall a bit more interesting and match the defensive positions on the side towers, and in a future video to match the cathedral I'll be building. You can see in this clip that I trimmed the gate piece with some scissors to make it the size I needed. The taller the gate piece was, the taller the walls would also need to be so that they could contain the gate within. Cutting the gate piece was the simplest solution, even though it may be borderline sacrilegious to a LEGO purist. In this next clip, I attached one end of a chain piece to the gate and the other end to a dual-sided crank system. This is a very simple but effective mechanism that also looks great and makes sense for minifigure scale. At this point, I actually ran out of the light gray bricks I needed to continue building the main gate and the side towers, so I put in an order on the LEGO Pick-a-Brick website and moved on to building the wooden walls of the Raven Knight Swamp Fortress. Let's first talk a little bit more in depth about the design of these walls that I showed you a prototype of earlier, because there was quite a bit of trial and error involved in getting something that had the right look but was also structurally sound enough to support a platform and minifigures on top. The first challenge that I had to overcome was creating long wooden poles that would be strong enough and not fall apart easily. Rather than stacking a bunch of 1x1 round bricks on top of each other, I found that using a combination of these short axles and Technic axle connector pieces made for a super sturdy long wooden pole design, while still allowing me to place these tan spiked pieces on top to make the wooden poles look like they had been sharpened into a point. The next thing I needed to figure out was a way to connect these individual wooden poles together and form a wall. There were a few different techniques that I used in combination with each other to achieve this. Since the walls are going to be placed at an angle and won't connect to the grid of studs on the base of the MOC, I couldn't connect the poles together that way. So instead, I switched out two of the Technic connector pole pieces from before and replaced them with Technic axle connector pieces with a pinhole in the middle. One of these connectors was placed at the top and the other at the bottom. You'll also probably notice that the piece at the top is rotated 90 degrees from the bottom piece. You'll see why I did that in just a moment, but first let's take a look at how the bottom connection works. Here, I simply used the longest pin piece that LEGO makes, which is a 3-stud long pin, and connected 2 other poles to it. This works great, but you'll notice that the most poles that I can connect together would be 3 poles using this method. That's where the top connection comes into the picture. As I mentioned before, this top connection is rotated 90 degrees from the one at the bottom. Again, I use a 3-stud long pin in the hole. On one side, I place a 1x1 round brick to cover the pin and also make it look like the walkway on top of the wall is resting on logs that are fastened perpendicular to the vertical poles of the wall. The backside of the wall is where the poles are connected to each other. Here, I was able to slide snot bricks onto the exposed pins and connect the poles together at the top. Then, I could simply add a brown plate on top, which would serve 2 purposes. Firstly, of course, it created the perfect walkway for minifigures to walk on top of the wall. And then secondly, it allowed me to connect as many of the snot bricks together as I wanted, and therefore the poles could all be connected together as one large piece. Even though this technique required a lot of pieces, I'm extremely happy with how strong and also how clean looking these wooden walls turned out. In order to build these walls, I ordered 600 1x1 round bricks, 250 1x1 round flat tiles with the tree stump print, 200 1x1 snot bricks, 30 1x4 snot bricks, 400 Technic axle connectors, 450 Technic axle connectors with a pinhole in the middle, 1,500 short red Technic axles, and 750 spear tip pieces. Here's a time lapse of me building each of these walls. Now that I was able to lay out the main gate, walls, and side towers, I started working on the terrain while I was still waiting for the light gray Pick-a-Brick parts order to arrive. To create the canals of swamp water for this MOC, I'm using the same technique I used on my river for the Black Falcon castle. If you didn't see my last building series, the way this technique works is by using 1 stud wide bricks and placing them on their side directly on top of the base plate studs. When you do this, the flat surface on the side of the bricks ends up being exactly 1 brick tall, which then allows you to place these angled plates on top and create a natural looking curved shoreline that is perfectly flush against the surface of the water. This building technique also has the advantage over using tiles due to the fact that there aren't large grooves left on the surface of the water like tiles would leave behind. Rather than blue water, I thought it would be so much more fitting to use sand green for the swamp water color. But because this color isn't very common, I had to order over 1,500 brand new sand green bricks of various sizes to build the water for the swamp. With this design in mind, I started laying out a rough shape for the islands using a bunch of old discolored white bricks and whatever other spare bricks I had lying around from my childhood collection. Remember that later I'm going to cover all these bricks with dark tan plates, so it won't matter how ugly these bricks or base plates underneath look. On the corner of the MOC that's visible to the viewer, you can see that I used dark tan bricks along the edges to match the color of the plates that will cover them. This is the corner where I started building the water. What's amazing about the design I came up with is that all these canals that weave through the MOC are actually one giant weirdly shaped wall placed on its side. The sand green bricks aren't actually connected to the MOC, but instead are held in place by the white bricks surrounding them that are pinching them into position. Once all the swamp water and the outlines of the islands were complete, I needed to cover the islands with large dark tan plates in the middle and dark tan angled plates along the shoreline. However, since I wasn't quite sure how large the islands would be, I hadn't ordered the dark tan plates yet, so I had to place yet another order from the Lego Pick-a-Brick website. I ended up ordering over 300 dark tan plates of various shapes and sizes. Around the same time, the Pick-a-Brick order I placed a few weeks earlier for all the light gray bricks finally arrived, so I started working on the main gate again. As I built the hexagonal towers taller, I added some cross-shaped defensive positions at the same height as the one in the middle. As we zoom in here, you can see how I built the tops of these hexagonal towers. These needed to be sturdy enough to place minifigures on top of, so I really put a lot of work into the design of these hexagonal platforms on top. Here you can see that the edges of the platform sit on top of tiles because they wouldn't line up with the studs on the angled walls below them. Once the platforms were built, I added these cheese slope pieces to the snot bricks to fill in the gaps between the walls. And with that, the main gate was complete. As you can see, the final build is incredibly sturdy, which is great since it won't be directly attached to the base plate on the bottom. A week later, the Pick-a-Brick order for the dark tan plates and angled plates arrived in the mail, so I started creating the terrain for the main island. I left the shorelines for last because I knew this would require a bit more time to get the right shape and natural looking curve along the shoreline. Next, I filled in the middle area of the large island to the left. Then, I filled in the smaller islands surrounding the edges of the MOC with dark tan plates. Lastly, I finished the terrain by adding the angled plates along the shoreline. As I'm adding these final plates, you can really see the look of the islands coming together now. Here's a quick look at the build progress so far. That's going to be all for this first update. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did and you're looking forward to seeing my next update where I'm going to be building the rockwork for a small cliff, a lighthouse, and an awesomely detailed cathedral at the center of the Raven Knights fort, make sure you leave a like on this video. Also, if you're interested in seeing even more behind the scenes content and supporting my future videos, you can become a paid member of my channel by clicking the link in the description of this video. By becoming a member, you'll gain access to features like more frequent behind the scenes photos and status updates on projects that I'm working on, like this newest castle MOC, members-only polls to help me decide the priorities of my projects and future videos, in-video shoutouts at the end of my future videos, and even early access to my latest videos. Members will also get access to these awesome-looking loyalty badges and emojis that I've designed just for members of this channel. I mean, come on, who wouldn't want access to this super cute emoji of my dog Bandit who has starred in a few of my recent videos? If you're not interested in becoming a member, you can always support me by subscribing, dropping a like, or leaving a comment. As always, thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for new videos coming soon. See ya!